Welcome to the Athletic FC podcast with me, Ayo Akinwolere. Manchester United have spent over 200 million in counting, but after continuous false dawns, will they deliver this season? All right, with us today, we've got Mark Critchley and Andy Mitten as well. All right, let's get into some of the numbers because on Thursday, the Athletic's David Ornstein reported that Manchester United have reached an agreement for RB Leipzig for Benjamin Sesko in a deal worth around 85 million euros. Critch, I've had various people in my WhatsApp group saying, all right, great deal, but how on earth are United affording this kind of signing right now?
It's a fantastic question because I don't know how many podcasts I've been on, especially this one over the last few months, where I've said United are skint, they're not going to be able to sign anyone, they got no money, and Ratcliffe say, we're going to go bust by Christmas, etc., etc. Look, I think the thing to say is going into this window, the message was very much that, okay, Cunha, yeah, he's in, he's basically through the door. And Bumo, there were in negotiations for him as well. Once those two deals got done, it was likely that United would then have to sell players in order to finance further signings. Now, likely there, I stress that word, and it's the operative word in that, because that was the message that was given to me, likely. And one thing that I was always conscious of when we were talking about this is that United have something called a revolving credit facility. Now, without getting too technical, this is essentially a credit card that allows them to borrow money up to a maximum limit of £300 million whenever they're short of cash, essentially. And so there was always a possibility that United might use this. They've used it in previous summers when they've been a little bit light on cash and when they've wanted to buy players in the market. Now, I think going into this summer, we almost didn't really, I sort of half expected that they wouldn't, simply because the message and what Ratcliffe had said, there'd been very much a sense that United need to be more disciplined, they need to be more prudent with their money after years of overspending, getting recruitment wrong. That's what had put them in the mess in the first place. That's why there's this hole in the finances, and so we can't make the mistakes of the past. I think what's perhaps changed is just how badly last season went. Just how embarrassing, frankly, it was to finish 15th in the league, to be outside of European football, and a real sense of urgency within the club now as well, and at that executive level, that things need to change. We can't repeat the mistakes of last season, whatever about the mistakes in the market of seasons past. So, look, there's confidence clearly in Ruben Amorim. I think you would take this as a sign of an endorsement of him. There's confidence in the executive structure around him that Ineos have put in place as well. And this is the moment where they've been back to say, okay, well, we believe that these players, this manager, this is the right way forward. Here's the money to do it. And let's not repeat what happened last season. And so the proof will be in the pudding. But I think this is, and look, you could say that United are in a way going down a similar path that they've trod before, and there's inherent risk within that. But I think the feeling within the club was that it was now or never, and that it was time to put the money where the mouth is, spend and bring players in who can hopefully bring them back to something a bit more respectable than 15th place in the league.
What are the rumours saying about Baleba as well from Brighton? Because that's another story that drops this week as well. I mean, he's not going to be cheap, is he?
He's absolutely not. I mean, it's a deal that a lot of Premier League clubs would like to do. He's one of the highest rated young holding midfielders in the league, in European football at least. And I think that it's going to cost, if United do it, it would cost more than £100 million. You're talking Moises Caicedo money. That's certainly a benchmark that's been set by Brighton in the past, and you would be looking similar parameters to that. Now, United have tried to explore those parameters this week. I think part of the thinking there is that there's going to be a market for him next summer. So if we can try and get ahead of the curve, if we can do it now and steal a march on other clubs that will definitely be in for him in future, then obviously that's, a feather in United's cap and something that helps them going forward. I still think that it might be quite an unrealistic and unlikely deal to do simply because of the numbers that we're talking about. I wouldn't get too excited about it just yet, but it shows that United mean business. It shows the level of ambition and the sense of urgency, again, that I referenced in the first answer, that is there within the club right now. They want to be bringing in the best young players that are available, and they're going to try and do that, even if it may seem unlikely.
Yeah, Andy, I've been listening to you guys on Talk of the Devils, and you've definitely deliberated whether or not Šeško is the kind of player that Manchester United need, right now in particular. Because, you think about Rasmus Højlund, it's had quite an interesting pre-season. You've still got Joshua Zirkzee there. Do you know what I mean? I'm sure United are looking over their shoulders, looking at business Liverpool are doing, business Arsenal are doing, obviously business City are doing. But is a striker what Manchester United need right now?
Yes. And I've just been on the tour and speaking to lots of people at the club. And if I had to identify two problem positions, then it would be goalkeeper and striker. And I think the tour has only hardened some opinions about what Manchester United need, actually not in those two positions, because Andre Onana is injured and Rasmus Højlund actually did quite well. I'm with Critch. If you would have said to me at the start of the transfer window, Manchester United would be doing this, all the information I had was that this wouldn't be something Manchester United are doing in terms of their outlay, that they had to sell first of all. But it was explained to me in Chicago how United are doing this, that some revenues have come in from sell-on fees, people like Anthony Elanga, Alvaro, who's gone to Real Madrid. And then United have moved on people like Marcus Rashford, who's one of the best paid footballers in the world. So that has made a difference. But Critch's point is absolutely right. This is needs must. There's a lot of good professional footballers at Manchester United, but good is not good enough for Manchester United. 15th was horrendous last season. And if this Ineos project is going to work, there's got to be a substantial improvement pretty quickly as well. Otherwise, people are going to lose faith in it. And this idea, and I spoke to Omar Barada only a month, 6 weeks ago, about the idea of winning the league in 2028. And he was derided for reiterating the claims. And from his perspective, he's like, we've got to have something to aim for. And I agree with that. But Manchester United need better players. They need goals. And I've been pretty supportive of Rasmus Højlund. There's absolute mitigation, as there is with most things at Manchester United. And he's not had the chances that a striker would have had in teams of yore. He's made lots of runs with no reward to it. But equally, you cannot say that him or the vast majority of Manchester United players had a good season last year. And some of the responsibility has to be with the players. So Critch is right. The manager is being backed to the hilt here. I spoke to him a week ago in Chicago. He comes across really well, good communicator, but he needs more than words. He needs wins, and he needs them now. And it's a tough start to the season. The signings have infused Manchester United fans. Šeško, absolutely, because that was unexpected. I think we're still going to see quite a considerable amount of movement between now and the end of the transfer window. Outgoings, incomings. I've always felt this. I thought there's going to be a lot of action towards the end. I think there's actually quite a lot of Manchester United players, apart from this so-called bomb squad, who the club would listen to. And yeah, I spoke to different people in the United States, and they were saying, what do you think Man United would do with this player or with that player? There's interest in a lot of Manchester United players. And sometimes it takes a season to start and for the player to realise he's not really featuring, for them to change their outlook. Andreas Pereira is a good example of that. He'd have a brilliant pre-season and then the season would start and he wouldn't be featuring. He's like, my future's not here. And there's loads of examples of that going down the years. So optimism is high among Man United fans, especially when you consider the last competitive game, probably the lowest point I've ever felt as a fan, that defeat in Bilbao against Spurs. There's got to be a big, big improvement. And I actually think there will be.
Critch, I've been talking to some of the tactics guys and we've been talking about the permutations of whether or not Benjamin Šeško does add more to Manchester United, for instance, or whether or not, dealing with that midfield might make someone like Rasmus Højlund's output much better. Does signing someone like Šeško solve Manchester United's problems, for instance? Just like, I guess, does Gyökeres solve Arsenal's problems, for instance?
I think the idea that there's just one problem that needs to be solved at Manchester United is a bit of a fallacy, and the one that we go through quite regularly. But what I would say, I'd agree totally with Andy that striker had to be a priority this summer, because you look at the amount of goals in the league last season. I think it was 44, which was the lowest that United had ever scored in the Premier League era. Højlund and Zirkzee, I think they combined. together they had 7 of those, which you obviously want more goals from your 2 strikers, especially 2 that you spent upwards of £100 million on over the last 2 summers. So there was reason and cause to look at that position again, and clearly Sesko ultimately is the preferred target and the one that they've gone for. I do think at the same time that goals don't exist in a vacuum. Strikers don't perform in a vacuum. You could look at United last season and say, yes, maybe the strikers weren't scoring, but who was really creating many chances aside from Bruno Fernandes and perhaps Amad Diallo as well? There wasn't a lot within that team. The amount of times you saw that team try and build up from the back and play through with the progressive style that Amorim wants, and essentially fail at it and get nowhere. And it was quite staid and quite tired. A lot of the play. There was fundamental issues there as well, and I think that is why, yes, okay, they've got Sesko. They've clearly identified the 2 number 10 positions as a priority before that as well. But we're talking about Baleba and saying how unrealistic it is. Even if they don't ultimately get Baleba because it is so unrealistic this summer, I wouldn't be surprised if they still go in for another midfielder, because I think it's been a position of concern and a position that needs to be addressed for some time. I don't know about Andy, you were over there in the US, and I think Manuel Ugarte is a talented player who has specific attributes that are very good. He didn't have a good night against Everton, and watching that game, you came out with thinking, if they're going to drop a lot of money on a striker here, there's still going to be a huge issue in midfield that needs solving. I'm not just picking on Ugarte there. I think they need to figure out what's the partnership. Is Bruno playing there? Is he not? Who's the best partner for him? So there's still a lot of questions, but I think the way that United are moving at the minute, the intention that they have in the market, I think Andy's right, there'll be business done, incomings, outgoings, and we will get some answers to those questions before the end of the window.
I think Ugarte's an interesting point, Critch, and I think you're spot on. So I spoke to him after the game in New Jersey when he'd played well against West Ham. And I get asked to speak to him because he'll only speak to external media in Spanish. But interestingly, he did his first internal media interview in English. And he's a good lad. I had a long interview with him at the end of last season. And he played well against West Ham, but didn't play well against Everton in Atlanta. And that was pretty alarming to watch, because if you think who Manchester United are going to come up against in the first game of the season, Zubimendi, Odegaard, Declan Rice, they're among the best midfield in the world. And the mood would just slump if they get destroyed by Arsenal at Old Trafford. And so United know that they need to be decisive. I think there's a feeling that there's a lot of good pros at Manchester United, but again, that's not going to be good enough. Sesko is someone United have watched for years. He's literally the number 1 target under Erik ten Hag. Of the 14 strikers on Manchester United's top 3 list, he was number 1, as in a long-term, high-quality option, someone who was going to cost a lot of money. Interestingly, 2 years ago, United thought he would be 75 million, and that's ultimately what he ended up costing. United couldn't sign him then and they found it very frustrating because the players, with the player's agent. But from their perspective, they were like, no, we want the player to continue to grow. And if he does grow as we expect, then you will come back in for him. And the deal will, A, be much more suited to him as a footballer, and B, be much more lucrative for us, for the player, for the club, and for the agent. So they've played a blinder, really, in how they've dealt with Sesko, and having more than one suitor has really helped as well. So I don't think that Baleba is an absolute guarantee purely for financial reasons. I think if you say now to United, do you want him? Yep. If you said to the player, do you want to join Man United? You'd absolutely get a yes. If you say to Brighton and Hove Albion, are you going to give a player away for a nice cut price deal?
No, definitely not. Definitely not.
that is not happening. So compromise will be needed. Maybe some of Manchester United's players are attractive to Brighton, for example. With the players who Manchester United are trying to move on, they're likely to have to take a wage cut, like Marcus Rashford did as well. And the agents as well. They'll have to take less than maybe they would have hoped for. But this will all be trading we'll see in the next few weeks.
In terms of outgoings, obviously, David Ornstein reported that Chelsea have stepped up their interest in Garnacho, which is probably great for United and their books, but what we're thinking about Sancho, Critch, and also Malacia, for instance.
Well, so Garnacho looks like there's been movement there. Chelsea and United talking, so that is progress on that front. Sancho, the issue with Sancho has always been that he's still one of United's highest earners, and if you were a buy-in club, I don't think you'd look at Jadon Sancho's performances over the last 2 or 3 seasons, in all fairness, and say that he is worth the salary that he's currently on. And so there needs to be some sort of negotiation there. It's a very difficult negotiation. It's one that United have done several times already before sending him out on loan to Dortmund and Chelsea. Whether it'll be another loan, we'll see. His contract expires at the end of the coming season. There's a +1 option. I don't think in any reality that United are going to extend that. So there's work to be done there. Tyrell Malacia, I'm not aware of any interest in Tyrell Malacia currently. He's somebody who wouldn't move the needle as such in terms of wages and fee, I don't think, like Sancho or Garnacho. And then there's Anthony as well, who obviously had such an impressive loan spell at Real Betis at the end of last season. I'm sure they'd love to make it permanent. The question is whether they've got the finances to do so. I think they've always been a club that hasn't been the most financially well endowed in Spanish football. Although they did break the world transfer record once, I actually found out, when they bought Danielson in 1997. So there you go. So,
Wow, knowledge.
But I think, again, a lot more negotiation needs to go on there, and it remains to be seen whether other clubs come to the fore. So plenty of work to be done on those players who we've been saying all summer United need to find solutions for them, simply because there's really no way back for them under Ruben Amorim. It's clear that he's drawn a line in the sand. He's moving forward with the group of players that he has right now at his disposal. So I wouldn't expect them to be reintegrated or see them playing again. I think that line has been drawn, and United need to find solutions for them.
I want to move on and talk about Ruben Amorim now, gents. Look, this is a massive season for him. His first full season with Manchester United. He's spoken about a cultural reset, but also feeling more excited ahead of this season. There's a great piece by Laurie Whitwell, which is a really in-depth interview with him. Andy, you've been out pre-season with Manchester United in the States. What are you feeling from Amorim? What's coming out of him right now? What are you seeing that's different?
Publicly, as you say, he's infused. He's up for it. Privately, I think he'll have some frustrations because he wants to get more deals done. I spoke to quite a few players off the record in the United States, and they're like, yeah, the mood's good, genuinely good. And they've not always said that. They'd tell me if that wasn't the case. But we need players. So that's why you're seeing people like Sesko coming in. And you're seeing a very close contact between Ruben Amorim and Jason Wilcox, Omar Barada, for example. They were all on the US tour. They were all speaking on a very, very regular basis. This is a very busy time for Manchester United. But the manager, as Critch said, absolutely being backed. He has all the power. His coaching group have absolute power and control, rightly or wrongly. And other people have been ostracised and pushed out of that. And am I comfortable with that? Not really. But then this happens in football. So, yeah, you have to accept that if he's a talented coach, he's going to should be allowed to use those talents and to do well and to help Manchester United improve. He had a lot of time on the training pitch in Chicago to push forward his ideas, and the idealized view of it is that it's going to look wonderful and everything's going to be fine. But we know that you don't just click on a switch and go from 15th to being league champions. It's a gradual process. So again, I think Manchester United will improve. I do like the signings who've come in so far. I do think the dressing room, in fact, I know the dressing room is in a far better place. And when he took control in November, I was saying on Talk of the Devils repeatedly, it's a very complex dressing room. And people are like, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by it? I just knew from all my sources that it was a very difficult dressing room. And I think it's now less difficult. I think he has got rid of some of the players who he doesn't want to be there. And he's trying to do a cultural reset. And we've heard that all before. We've heard it under Ole Gunnar Solskjaer and Louis van Gaal and Jose Mourinho. I think he's probably going deeper and being backed than any of his predecessors to really start again with Manchester United. And that has extended not just to the football side, but the staff at the club as well. Often with pretty sad consequences. Good people have lost their jobs. A lot of good people have decided this is no longer for them. because Ineos, who are now the decision makers, are like, look, with respect, we know you're good, but we want to bring our own people in. Again, that happens in football. So you've seen it not just at Carrington, but at Old Trafford. And the job cuts have been well publicised. And I think United needed to trim because it was a loss-making football club, 90 million a year on average. Something had to change there. But there are some really competent people who've just looked at it and gone, you know what, this isn't really for me. And they've got excellent jobs elsewhere because they're very good at what they do. So it's the football side, and it's also the Old Trafford side. Major changes. More changes in the last 12 months than I've known in 35 years covering Manchester United.
One thing I have noticed, Critch, since he came in last season was sometimes his, I guess, too honest approach to, press conferences and things like that. It feels like it's just part of his nature. He's often spoken about how he thought about walking away, he's spoken about having his hands tied last season, or fighting with his hands tied last season. What have you made about how he's delivered, a lot of his chat to the press and also to his players?
Well, honestly, as a journalist covering United, I'm not going to complain when someone's too honest in his position. It's manna from heaven from us sometimes. And I remember being sat in the press conference after the Brighton game in January when he described the team as the worst team in United's history. Now, that was a comment that got a lot of traction. I remember being sat in the room at the time, and it felt honestly like there was a context there that was perhaps being missed once it left the room. That he was talking about how during that period when United would lose games or draw games, there was always some statistic like this is the worst team since 1897 or whatever. So he was trying to frame it with that and acknowledge the fact that look, they're not doing well right now, and he knows what the stats say. That was at least my kind of read of it. But at the same time, you struggle to defend him on that front because he knows what he's saying in that moment. In fact, he even said, "Here's your headline." When a manager says, "Here's your headline," you're going to have to write that headline. And the thing about headlines is, players read them, and people read them in general, and people take that to mean to be the whole story, essentially, often. And I think that was the case, actually, especially with some of the playing squad at the time when he said that. I think that didn't go down particularly well with everybody. And so he is honest to a fault sometimes, and I don't think it's always necessarily helped him in his relationships within the club and with his players. But what I would say is, coming back to Andy's point there, that this has been such a period of drastic change. I think it makes sense a lot of the time to actually confront that, be honest about it, be direct about it. And he has now, as we're saying, got a squad that he believes are all pulling in the same direction, that are all aligned to his vision, that are all with him moving forwards. And I think that perhaps doesn't happen if you aren't as direct and as blunt as he has been in his public dealings with the media when he's talking about the trials and tribulations of being United manager and what the team's going through at that current point. So ultimately, I've got to say I respect it and I understand why he does it, and I think he's going to continue doing it because I think if we've learned one thing about him, other than the fact that he's honest, is that he's quite stubborn, he's quite set in his ways, he's going to do things his way, and that's been abundantly clear ever since he came into the job last November.
Yeah, Andy, this code of conduct, every new coach at Manchester United obviously wants their new regime, new ideas, but I don't know, something feels really interesting in trying to reshape the attitude that the players have with Amorim. Can you tell us a little bit more about what this code of conduct means? Because I know they've got new medical staff and nutritionists, but he's really trying to enforce some sort of discipline here, isn't he?
Yeah, and with good reason. But as you said, as you asked the question, we've heard it all before. David Moyes banning chips, that gets your headline, which is Critch is quite right. I've actually spoken to David Moyes about this. I met him in Chicago. I've known him for a long time. Said, I never banned chips. So where does the truth lie on all of these things? Because there's often like 4 or 5
I'd pick off personally, man. No one's banning my chips, man. I need my treats,
different versions. So I remember Ole Gunnar Solskjaer coming in and genuinely making a difference. And every single Manchester United manager in the post-Fergie era all says they left the club in a better place than the one they arrived at. And they have absolute conviction when they say that. They believe in it. And I think Ruben Amorim, if he left tomorrow, would say exactly the same thing, even though the team have finished 15th. So there's a lot of different versions of the truth in football. But I think we can see he's trying to make fundamental changes. There are some players for whom managers have had long-standing issues with, and he's basically come in and gone, that's it. Good luck. Your future is not here. I'm going to do something about it now. I'm not going to try and change how you are. Leopards do not change their spots. Okay. These are the players I want to work with, and we're going to move forward from here. And he has absolutely been given power. So him and Jason Wilcox are very, very close, Almo Barada, because it's all on them as well. If Ruben Amorim fails, they are the people who've pushed for him. And this is all under Sir Jim Ratcliffe, who's backing these people. And these people have got very good pedigrees. Jason Wilcox was excellent at Manchester City. Omar Barada is a very highly rated football executive. And Ruben Amorim, who several sources have said to me, Manchester City wanted him to replace Pep Guardiola. So Manchester United have acted and got the man in less than ideal circumstances. He didn't want to come mid-season, but he did come mid-season. And I think it has helped that he has come mid-season, because it's allowed him a half a season or a little bit more to get used to living in a new country, a new football league, his players, who does he want, who doesn't he want, the media, which is very different to the Portuguese media. It's a global concern when you're at Manchester United. And someone said to me last week, after I'd posted how well I came across in an interview, maybe you should do less talking and concentrate more on winning football matches. And I replied to that person. I don't normally reply on social media because it's just, X is not a good place for a reasoned discussion. And I said, if Ruben Amorim had his way, I don't think he'd be doing any interviews. But you are contractually obliged to do interviews. When you sign the contract for any Premier League club, you're contractually obliged. I was like, oh, didn't know that. And he's sick of it. He said himself when he was being far too honest, I'm sick of hearing my own voice. I'm sick of saying the same things. And people like Critchley who are sat 3 or 4 meters in front of him. And I'm the one busying myself finding out when were Man United this bad. Okay, got it. Yep, it's December 1933. And that was my stat. I can remember where it was.
Not 1897, I knew it.
Going back and back and back and back. And then you're thinking, are you sure? We can't have been that bad then. And no, this is definitely 1933. We've not been that bad for... And it's almost surreal, because no one expected this to happen with Manchester United. So there's absolutely new people in charge at the club. Everything has changed. All the senior leadership team, I think there's only Colette Roach left there now. Major changes. And then, the football analyst department has changed completely. The coaches, the youth system. So you speak to people like Nick Cox, who's headed up the youth academy, very popular, very good at his job. Everything's great. And then he goes, whoa. And he obviously takes a very attractive job at Everton as well. But it's out with the old and in with the new, big time. And there will be more changes. This isn't just going to stop when the Premier League season starts. It'll be less dramatic than it's been in 24-25, but still a long way to go.
Yeah, Critch, I don't want to big this up any more than it needs to, but do you feel there's something different here?
I feel like it's still very early to say that. I wasn't in the US myself. I did go to Stockholm for the first pre-season game. We didn't have a lot of time around. It was just one game. Obviously, you get more of a sense, I think, when Andy was over there for a whole 2 weeks, and Laurie as well. One word, just following it from afar, that seemed to be used over and over again was the word bond, like as though this was the group that was together now had really formed a really tight-knit group, a close bond, that they were all, again, singing from the same hymn sheet, moving in the same direction. And naturally, as a journalist, I was a little bit sceptical. I was a little bit cynical that I was, well, they would say that, wouldn't they? They would want to say that. But honestly, the more and more that time has passed since those tour games, you chat to people, it does seem legitimate that there is a bit of a better atmosphere than there has been in the past. I know what Andy's saying about difficult dressing rooms. There's been a toxicity. Luke Shaw referenced it as well when he was speaking on tour. That's definitely been the case in previous years. You look at the group that's together now, it's a similar one that was there at the end of last season, only really Alejandro Garnacho has been exiled. The other players are out on loan as well. But there is a tighter knit group now, and that is coming through. Whether that translates and manages to survive essentially the pressures that come with playing for this club during a Premier League season where you are expected to be challenging for major honours. And look, this season, we might talk about expectations later, but I think United is almost, it's like Speed, right? You know, the film Speed. It's like the bus that could never slow down. You have to sort of be achieving at a certain rate, otherwise people are going to be on your back, and it's a very intense environment to be in. And so I would still question whether this, optimism, this good feeling survives what is coming, because it's a hugely critical period. We've essentially arrived at a similar moment that we were at a year ago, I think, where you had Erik ten Hag in charge, but there was a little bit of uncertainty. The season before had been so poor, and the pressure was on from the very first moment. There was no margin for error. Perhaps it's not as extreme as then, because Ten Hag was, very close to losing his job at the end of that season. But it does feel like a similar moment. But the noises, the things that we're hearing have been more positive than usual. And I think that is a reason, or at least a little cause for optimism going into the new campaign.
Andy, I want to talk about Amorim's relationship with Sir Jim Ratcliffe. He's spoken about this sort of no BS relationship that they've got. And I wonder what those conversations actually look like, because Sir Jim clearly is a big personality. Ruben Amorim is clearly a guy who knows what he wants. Do you think that's what works for Sir Jim? The fact that this guy actually isn't backing down and can actually stand up to him and say, actually, this is what I want. I don't agree with what you're saying here.
Yeah, Ruben Amorim knows far more about football and footballers than Sir Jim Ratcliffe ever will. Know your lane. But it's easy saying that. I've spoke to countless managers over the years where the president or the leading official at the club has actively interfered in team selection. I've spoken to Real Madrid managers who've said to me that, they've been put under major pressure to play certain players. And to be fair to Manchester United and even to the Glazers, I've never heard any evidence of that at Manchester United. Now, if Sir Jim Ratcliffe has any ideas from a football perspective, I've no doubt that Ruben Amorim is telling him, look, I'm in charge here. I'm the man. I know exactly what I am doing here. And that should be an education for Sir Jim Ratcliffe. As a journalist, sometimes I watch games with coaches and you learn from them. And they'll say, did you see that? And you're like, no. And that's why they are UEFA Category A coaches and you're not. And I don't mind if they have an honest relationship where they're joking with each other, where they're winding each other up. I've sat in a room with Jim Ratcliffe and spoke to him for 40 minutes. You can have a very frank conversation. You can disagree. That's fine. Doesn't mean you never speak to him again. He's been extremely successful in business doing what he's done. You don't always have to agree with him. There's been decisions he's made with ticket prices, for example. I strongly disagree with him and told him about it. I didn't just moan on the internet. I told him to his face about it. And that's communication. The opposite of that is no communication. And there are previous Manchester United managers who've had no communication. They've literally not heard, I'm not just going to say Jim Ratcliffe because everyone will think Erik ten Hag didn't hear from him. But I never had an understanding that Erik had the same relationship with Sir Jim Ratcliffe that Ruben Amorim has. So if they're talking after games, I think Jim Ratcliffe would be well within his rights to say, this is terrible. When's this going to end? And he can push back and go, actually, it's going to be really bad for the rest of the season. I'm just hoping that side of it is out of the way now. And it's on all of them. If Man United do badly, the manager will get stick, but Sir Jim Ratcliffe will get stick as well. Omar Barada will, Jason Wilcox will. So I like Critchley's caution because there's a few giddy Man United fans now. One of them said to me yesterday, my dad's put a tenner on United winning the league.
Oh, no.
I don't know if a tenner's giddy. I don't know if that counts as giddy. Maybe.
But the odds are giddy. The odds are really giddy for that.
And then he said, I'm just going for top four myself, and he was a lot more than a tenner. So part of me's thinking, I don't mind Manchester United fans smiling, because for most of the last year, it has been so grim. So the problem is no games have been played. This is sort of, the transfer junkies getting high on the hit of new signings. And they all think they're going to be a success. You wind back a year, people were saying that Ugarte is going to be this, the solution to this problem. Josh Zirkzee is going to be this. Nous Mazraoui is going to be that. There's no guarantees that all the signings are going to work. But, and maybe I'm getting wrapped up in the pre-season optimism here, I do think they will work.
You're getting giddy, Andy.
Transfer junkie Andy Mitten, I never thought I'd see it.
Yeah. I love it. Right, let's move on. Let's look ahead to this season. Manchester United have made new signings, possibly more to come. There will be no European football as well, Andy, this season. What are the expectations from inside the club?
Finish in a position where there is European football next season. In fact, I know that. I know that's the expectation inside the club. 15th is simply not acceptable. So I think that would be your minimum marker. What is European football? Because, it's not just top 5 anymore. You can be going 6th, 7th, 8th. If United finished 8th and got into the Conference League, I'd hardly say that would be viewed as a resounding success. I think you need to see a lot more goals, a lot more entertainment, and a European finish, because European football has been integral to Manchester United. The club is structured on not just European football, but Champions League football. And that affects everybody, from the number of players that you need to the number of analysts you need, and the whole fan psyche. I've written numerous articles on Manchester United's European adventures. Even as a journalist, going back to last season, when United drew Athletic Club in the semi-final, I used existing contacts to get an interview with an Athletic Club player. Previous round, Lyon, I used existing contacts to get an interview with Nemanja Matic. That's all gone now. And those weeks between games really will feel drawn out. And hopefully not too depressing, because Manchester United are a little bit better.
It's not going to be easy, Critch, but can Manchester United afford to finish the season outside of the Champions League again?
In the financial sense, or in the sense that...
Both.
Well, you're right to say both, to be honest, because they're both intertwined together, I think. Financially, look, another year outside of the Champions League would be the third consecutive, wouldn't it? Yeah, third consecutive if it was another one. And that would be, it would be unprecedented in the post-Alex Ferguson era. It would be a mark of quite how far the club would have fallen. But we're getting ahead of ourselves here and imagining that finishing 15th again come May. Let's try and stay on the optimistic tip. I think it outside the Champions League wouldn't be so much of a damaging effect, as long as Andy says, I think there was European football, Europa League, as long as there was a sign of clear progress, not just an improvement on 15th, because that's quite a low bar to have to just get over, but clear progress. And let's not forget that when Omar Barada's talking about title challenges in 2028, that's 3 seasons away as we stand here today. If it seems an ambitious goal, if it doesn't that seem as ambitious come the end of the season, I think that will be a huge positive and something that United can work with. But it does, can they afford it? I think it's imperative for Ruben Amorim, it's imperative for Omar Barada, it's imperative for Jason Wilcox that they have now been given the support, that they have now been back, that they show this progress, because as we said at the top, there just cannot be simply a repeat of last season. And perhaps another year in the bottom half would be more acceptable if United had been very restrained in their spending this summer and they'd shown caution and they'd looked after the pennies as we were told they were going to have to. But they've spent now, and that brings expectation with it, and those will only rise. And so I think, if anything, that's sort of increased the expectation, increased the pressure. But then when isn't the expectation insanely high at Old Trafford anyway? That's always been the case.
I can't believe I'm about to say this statement, Andy, but because it is Manchester United, but it does feel like Manchester United have been rebuilt from the ground up. You've got Carrington, new training facilities being built. You've got the stadium as well that needs to be rebuilt as well. And I know, Critch, you're going to get to take a look at Carrington, but I mean, this has to feel like an interesting point for the club in terms of the intent they want, in terms of where they want to see the club going.
Yep. Carrington had faded, much like a lot of the infrastructure at Manchester United under the Glazers. There wasn't enough investment going into it. So what was best in class in 2000 wasn't in 2023. And now it's had a serious makeover and will be up there. I've seen the images. I've been going in sort of piecemeal throughout last season. The bigger question is Old Trafford. We've seen the plans for that, a new stadium, a redevelopment. Sir Jim Ratcliffe favours a new stadium. How that will be funded still remains to be answered. So that's not going to be a quick fix. I like the intent of doing something, because I was writing for 15 years that Old Trafford needed to be either expanded or modernised. And at first, honestly, people were going, "What are you on about? We need a new number 9. But as the paint peeled more, you got to like 2018 and people are like, yeah, you might have a point here. And then as new stadiums open, Old Trafford started to look much more dated. It's still a very good stadium, I must say. It's not falling down like some away fans think. So Ineos changed the training ground. They want to change or redevelop Old Trafford, as I've discussed, and absolutely want to change the football side of it. Money's gone into the club. Is it an ideal ownership? Not at all. The Glazers are still there. But it was put to me when the deal was done. So Jim Ratcliffe has done the only deal that he feels that he could get done. It's complicated. It's unedifying, as is much of football's ownership structure, not just at Manchester United. But you are right. It feels like a new start, more so this season than last season, because people were... they'd only just been arriving, so they couldn't really impact when you've been there for 2 weeks. But I think they've had a sense of weighing everything up and feeling like, okay, we've got to hit bottom before we can rise again. And I do believe that, but I also remember this having a chat with Ed Woodward in December 2019, I think it was, under Jose Mourinho, so maybe it was 18, and is like, we've got to hit rock bottom first. So we have been here before, but I do sense this time it is more of a genuine reset.
I know we're trying to stay on the relatively positive right now, Critch, but on Tuesday, you reported on The Athletic that the Manchester United supporters group, the 1958, will be protesting against Sir Jim Ratcliffe ahead of the season opener. What is that all about?
Well, I mean, we're used to these protests. They've become slightly more regular over the last few years, but certainly over the last 2 decades since the Glazers' leveraged takeover took place. So yeah, the 1958 group, the supporters group, one of several United supporters group, possibly, maybe, I don't know if Andy would agree, but maybe one of the more militant ones that are around at the minute, certainly in terms of calling for these protests and these demonstrations. They called for another one, and this time they said that the difference with it was that Jim Ratcliffe himself would be a focus of it, as well as the Glazers. Previously, they've kind of only solely been directed at the Glazers. And so that was called on Tuesday, but actually quite interesting development since then. I think some of the reaction to that, certainly online, wasn't best. Well, it wasn't totally aligned with it. People were asking, why are we doing this now? With this sense of optimism that we've been talking about, people felt it jarred slightly with that. And then the 1958 subsequently sent out a survey and were asking for feedback and like recommendations and a sentiment, essentially, to make sure that they were actually reflecting the fan sentiment on this. So I think that is actually an interesting note of I think maybe the protest goes ahead. I don't know at this stage, but that is interesting that perhaps in the past, when these things have been called, people have gone along with it. Some people have attended, some people haven't. But this time there was a bit of pushback against it. And I think that perhaps speaks to that there is this sense among fans that, okay, look, the Glazers certainly are a problem, but Jim Ratcliffe, despite a lot of the change that we've seen over the last 18 months, despite the cost-cutting measures, and there's been songs against Jim Ratcliffe sung inside Old Trafford and on these protests as well, but there's still a sense that people want to see what Ineos do, see their ambitions for the club, see how far this goes. It's not quite that level of opprobrium that you would expect with the Glazers just yet. So I thought that was interesting. We'll see if the protest goes ahead, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting because we're trying to look forward and we're trying to see where this new idea of Manchester United will end up, Andy. But let's not forget, there is still a lot of unrest with many fans as to what's come before and how things are actually moving forward.
The Glazers remain a significant issue for Manchester United and Manchester United fans. I think if you ask fans, would you like to see the Glazers leave tomorrow? You'd be getting 95% saying yes. So Jim Ratcliffe is very different, as Critchley said. There was a lot of pushback to that suggestion of a protest towards Ratcliffe by the 1958 group this week, and then they qualified what they said. They said, actually, we're going to listen to people here. I think you had a couple of factors there. One, people think Ratcliffe is very different to the Glazers, or hope that he will be. Two, there's a lot of pre-season optimism about. And United fans on one hand have prided themselves of not being reactive and protesting with results. But if there's one point in the season where fans are feeling okay about things, this week, Carrington's going to open, Sesko's going to sign. The cynic cannot look back at that and say, oh, right, a few shiny new signings and everything's okay, is it? It's not like that. But there was a big pushback against that idea. And I think that Ratcliffe had a fair wind of support up until November 24. If you remember, a few weeks before the ticket price rise was announced, he presented Bruno Fernandes with a Player of the Month award on the pitch at Old Trafford and was politely applauded. The Glazers would not be afforded anything like that. And then the ticket price rise really annoyed people. And then within 2 months, you had people going up to Sir Jim Ratcliffe at Fulham away and having a go at him, which he didn't like. I still think the fact that money has been put into the club makes him very different to the Glazers. And in the eyes of most fans, that's still the case. And I think a lot of fans still want him to succeed. I want it to succeed. None of this is ideal, but I preferred it to state ownership, and a lot of United fans did as well. So it depends who you ask. You can get really swayed by seeing what you see online. It's often very different to the reality of actually being there at Old Trafford in real life. And I've learnt that over 30 odd years writing about Manchester United. It's actually quite nice in real life, going to games. And at time you look on Twitter and it's just poison and it's toxic. I know that when I'm stood on St Matt Busby Way before the Arsenal game next week, providing Manchester's weather doesn't let us down again, I think the mood will be pretty positive, which is one hell of a turnaround when you consider the last game was in Bilbao.
All good, Jets. Honestly, I really appreciate your time. Thanks so much for joining us, Mark and Andy. And before we end, something for you to keep your eye on this Sunday. Avon Leventhal has been given insider access to the world of referees, looking at what it takes to actually be one. And he's explaining some of the new rules to look out for as well. Here's a little taste.
What if I was to tell you that 97.5% of decisions last season were deemed to be accurate?
Were accurate? And how many times did they have to come out and apologise?
Well, you would think they would get more, right, because of all the VAR that they've got and stuff like that.
Nothing's going to be 100% perfect, but I'm fed up of talking about VAR. I'd rather have a discussion about a referee and they be on their merits, if I'm completely honest.
Yeah, 97.5, that is a very strong number. It does surprise me a little bit.
It's undoubtedly more scrutinised than ever. And unfortunately as well, I have to say, more questioning around the motivations around decisions, less acceptance of the decision just being a human decision made in the moment by somebody who's wanted to do a really good job, works hard day to day throughout their entire professional life to be the best possible version of themselves on the field, contributing to the game, delivering good performances. But if they get a decision wrong, which is undoubtedly a decision that's taken with good intentions of trying to get the right call, but maybe missing the mark, in the moment, people will form an opinion that there's something else behind that decision, and there isn't.
That's Inside the World of Premier League Referees, out on Sunday. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you guys next time. If you want to watch more episodes of the show, please subscribe to the channel. We'll be joined by the likes of David Ornstein, Matt Slater, Adam Crafton, Carl Anker, and plenty more through the season. If you'd like to listen to the episodes in full in audio form, search The Athletic FC wherever you get your podcasts from.